Thank you, Chair. We're now broadcasting.
Okay.
Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Hilary. Welcome everybody to this virtual Baldock and District Area Committee meeting that is being conducted with members and officers, I would emphasise that, at various locations communicating via audio, video and online. There is also the opportunity for the public and the press to listen and view the proceedings. Before the meeting starts, I would like to invite the committee member and scrutiny manager to explain how proceedings will work and to confirm that members, officers and registered speakers are all in attendance. Hilary.
Thank you, Chair. So we'll start with a roll call. When I call your name, I would please indicate your attendance. I'd like to confirm that all members and officers are present and can hear and be heard. So members, Councillor Jarvis. Sorry, you're muted, Steve.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor McNally.
Present.
Councillor Muir.
Present.
Councillor Shanley.
Yeah, present, Hilary. Thank you.
Councillor Tyson.
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Weeks.
Present.
The following officers are Simon Ellis.
Present.
William Edwards.
Present.
And myself. Then we have from the Affinity Water, we have Jake Rigg.
Jake is not present.
Oh, right. Richie Carruthers.
Aye, present.
Thank you. And Alessandro Massili.
Yes, present.
Thank you. And from the Environment Agency, we have Matt Ramskar.
Yep, present.
Ian Page.
Present.
And Rob Bakewell.
Good evening.
Good evening. And we have 3 members of the public who are from Revival. So back over to you, Chair.
Thank you. Straight into the agenda. Item 1 is apologies for absence. None have been received. We are all present. Notification of other business. We have been notified of nothing. Chairman's announcements. In accordance with council policy, this meeting is being audio recorded as well as filmed. The audio recordings will be available to view on mod.gov and the film recording via NHDC YouTube channel. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before any item. The detailed reminder about this and the speaking rights is set out under the Chair's announcement on the agenda. Item 4 is public participation, and we do have a request from the Ivor Springs, I can't remember what they're called, but it's the support group. And I would ask that both Affinity Water and the EA will perhaps note what is being said and respond in the next item. And I think we are going to have Sharon and Bernard to speak to this. Is that correct? Hello?
Yes, that's correct, as well as Richard Meredith Hardy also.
Okay, so Sharon, over to you.
Thank you. So hello to those who I've met before and those who I've not yet met in face to face. So thank you for allowing me this time. My question is that if Affinity Water, this is to the Environment Agency, and I'd like you to answer that during your presentation if possible. If Affinity Water were to agree to augment Ivor Spring with a greater amount than the 0.4 megalitres which is currently proposed, is that something that the Environment Agency would accept and approve of? And if not, could you explain why not also? I also want to say that our concern is not just about the spring, it is about the entire upper reaches of the River Ivel. And we are, just for your knowledge, that we are Revival, the group. And so we're not just concerned about the spring, it's the upper reaches of the river as well. So that's my question. Thank you.
Does Bernard wish to say anything? Bernard?
Yes, please.
Okay.
If affinity water measure flow rates, will affinity water measure flow rates in the Ivel and pump water from their extraction allowance to maintain a flow of 57.8 litres per second at Whitehorse Farm? That was to affinity water.
Okay, Sharon, could I come back to you, please? And for the sake of any members of the public who are listening to this meeting, could you just perhaps go over the background of the River Ivel, and particularly the springs and the lower reaches? What's happened over the past few years, please?
Yeah, thank you. I'd be delighted to. So historically, we know that the River Ivel, the upper reaches of the Ivel, was a perennial stream and a chalk stream. That's important to note, and that the precious, rare resource that we're privileged to have on our doorstep. And the river flow was sufficient for there to be many trout farms, for there to be numerous mills. And the changes that are reflected now due to abstraction are that the river ceases to flow. And when the river loses flow, then we have issues with the wildlife, and we have issues with pollution in the water. And we have issues now with the springs having been dry. Despite that incredibly wet autumn and winter that we had last year, the springs are dry now, and they've been dry since around July, and that is affecting the water levels. So we have diminishing levels of water and we have no flow. And what Revival are concerned about is the constant abstraction. We've spoken with Affinity Water and are in discussions about that. And we're saying that groundwater, which is what the source of the river is, that groundwater sources for public consumption just aren't sustainable. So we're really asking for us locally to take care of our precious chalk streams in the way that we would if they were the Amazon, or if they were any of the melting polar ice caps, for example, because this is just how precious and rare they are. They need care and taken care of, and that means there needs to be some action and some changes. And so Revival are absolutely clear that we want the flow of the river to be maintained, and for abstraction rates to be linked to the flow. And what that means is if there is no flow, there should be no abstraction. And that, in a nutshell, is what we're about.
That's great, Sharon. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, moving on to item 5, which is the item on.
Excuse me, Chair. Before you move on, I think Richard Meredith Hardy wanted to speak as well.
Okay. Hello.
Yeah. Hello. Yes. Good evening, everyone. As it happens, in the last 3 or 4 years, and this is addressed to the Environment Agency, one of my neighbours at Radwell wanted to have an abstraction, a winter abstraction license, and this was calculated by the Environment Agency to have a hands-off flow of 153 litres a second, which I think is around about 11 megalitres a day. and this is in the upper arrival here. According to the affinity water calculation, flow recording that's been going on since 2015, the flow has never reached anything like that. So the Environment Agency calculated this this flow on some sort of algorithm that they do to do with catchment and geology and all sorts of things. But the 153 litres a second hands-off flow is not dissimilar to what we're after, and yet it never gets anywhere near that. So there is a fundamental problem admitted by the Environment Agency that flow is nothing like it should be.
Okay. Do you want to formulate a question for the next item, Richard, at all, of the agencies?
Well, and when it comes down to the earlier questions that we put in revival, is what are the Environment Agency going to do to get a flow which is at least 153 litres per second in the winter, and presumably, seeing as that was a hands-off flow, it's actually much more flow than that.
Okay, Richard, thank you very much. And okay, now we're moving on to item 5, which is Idle Springs and the Affinity Water and the Environment Agency. But before we start, can I say, hopefully you've listened to the questions from the public and you are able to respond to them as best you can. But I would say that we had you here perhaps a year ago, the last time, and we were hoping that you would have returned a lot before now, but we've heard nothing at all. And the situation with the stream has not improved at all. So I don't know who's going to speak first, but we have Alessandro, we have Ian, Matt, and Rob, and I think there's someone else there as well. So gentlemen, over to you, please.
All right, this is Alessandro Marsili from Affinity Water. Actually, I can share the screen, so I can. It's better if I share the screen from my side.
Yep.
So I can command it. I will try to share. Oh, it's disabled. Okay. I mean, I can do it like that. So I will try to reply to the question that has been asked me by Ashley before, and then this one that has been asked now. And if you can go to the next slide, please. So the next slide. Yes. So this is just to give a background of what we did in the last 5 years. This is the catchment, and there are 3 pumping stations at the very top of the catchment. That's indicated with the names there, and the table below is the current abstraction licenses that we have. So we have 3 individual pumping stations. The first pumping station is Bulldog Road on the left, and is 4.54 daily megaliter a day license, and the other 2 is 796. And the group license means that the sum of the 3 abstractions together, they cannot pass in an average year 14.8 megaliter a day, and there's a peak that is used when you have a peak demand, which goes up to 20 megaliters a day. The Environment Agency followed the Water Framework Directive and asked the water company to investigate this catchment because it was classified in 2013 as moderate status. For this reason, we did an investigation, and I'm going to show you, if you go to the next slide, the outcome somehow of the investigation. And so what you can see here is that we try to conceptualize the catchment, and it's important to have an understanding how the groundwater hydrology and the ecology works in this catchment to have then a better answer in the future when you're going to implement modification. So at the top one, you see a cross-section, basically from southeast to northwest of the catchment. And you can see the vertical lines there, they are our borers. And you can see the chalk aquifer is pinching out towards the north. And if you see, there are two tiny lines. One is the green line, that is pinched out approximately around the Ave Springs. This is an horizon in the aquifer, which is very transmissive, brings a lot of water. And when it outcrops there, it creates what is the Ave Spring. And there's another horizon below, which is the Tottenham Stone, is the purple one, which outcrop roughly around Radwell. So these 2 points are the main groundwater emerging location. And then below that one, the aquifer is almost unproductive. And if you see the graph below, you have basically the flow in the Ivel along all different points. And you can see that there are two increasing steep. One, the first step up is around the spring area, and the second step up is around the Radwell Mill. So these 2 points is where you have these two big springs. And then there is a general accretion profile that goes from the spring area up to Radwell near Stotford. Further downstream, the Ivel itself, it has a variable behavior, so it will increase when there is rainfall and wet periods, but for dry periods, the river actually losing. And because it's not connected to the chalk aquifer anymore, there is no chalk aquifer there anymore, and you can lose to the banks. If you go to the next slide. Thank you. This is again the same plot. We measured the flow in the river for 5 years, every month. It's the same plot, and in this case, you have the flow on the left side, and you have the rainfall on the right side, and each line represents basically one location. And as Sharon was saying before, the spring area, which is the orange one, is the lowest one, and you can see easily that it was dry for a period, for instance, between July 18 and November, December 19. And equally, there was a period of dryness between, I think, May, June 17 and December. And recently has been off also around July, it dry out. And the next one is the Black Horse Farm, which is the clear blue. Then you have the other one where basically from Radwell Mill, where Richard lives, the flow is somehow perennial. You can see this is never went dry. And what is important was, I think Richard was mentioning about the flow that he was measuring around Radwell, and he was mentioning about 11 megaliters a day. This, if you want to compare it with that one before, is actually between the green line and the blue line. You can see that the blue line, it varies up to 20 megaliters as a peak, and a minimum goes to 3 megaliters during these 5 years. This is just to give you an idea. If you go to the next slide, again, this is just to show you what the investigation found. So the investigation found that basically the Ivel obviously is groundwater fed, and there are these two big horizons, Melbourne Rock, Tottenham Stone, that bring groundwater into the river at the Ave Spring and the Radwell. Abstraction, a boring and fuel, which are represented here in the boreholes, what they do, when they abstract, there is a potential to impact the groundwater level, so the groundwater levels is decreased. As a consequence, you have an impact in terms of flow at the spring area. The impact around Radwell is basically assessed as negligible because it's outside the cone of influence, and the flow direction is more toward the west. What happened also, there is some confining layer near the spring area, so the groundwater doesn't easily come up in the river in all locations, but just in spot location, because elsewhere there is some clay layers that prevent the groundwater to come out easily. The investigation also confirmed that the flow is heavily controlled by man-made structure, historic structure that has been mentioned in the mills, and the ecology is affected not only by the construction and the structure, but also from the morphology of the channel, and there are some water quality aspects that apparently they are impacting the ecologies. The table below is from the Environment Agency classified water body status, and you can see that from 2013 to 2019 is vary between good and failing. At the reason why it's failing essentially is because of pollution from rural areas and physical modification. So when we did the investigation M6, at the end of the day, we found that the river itself, from the hydrology perspective, at the compliance points at the bottom of the plant is compliant. But obviously the investigation found this potential impact obstruction on the Ave Spring. So we decided to do an intervention for this next 5 years on the Ave Spring. If you go to the next slide. Thank you. Obviously, before deciding what to do, there was an option appraisal that we did. This option appraisal basically we listed all the potential options that they could be implemented to intervene on the spring area. Among this one, there was reduction in obstruction, there was recirculation of treated effluent, there was augmentation from our obstruction or from in standalone boreholes, and other options. Obviously, this one, you account, when you do this appraisal, you account the feasibility, you account the effectiveness, you account the costs, the implementation costs, and also the maintenance costs. And basically, the implementation is selected the option 19, which is one of those ones that was, even if it's not from the calculation of the spreadsheet, it wasn't basically returning a benefits cost ratio feasible. So above 1, it was still selected because we recognized that there was a problem, even if it's not economically convenient according to the criteria established by the Environment Agency. So the option basically is the creation of an augmentation borehole near the spring that will top up the flow at the river when it's needed. And in addition to that, there will be a package of river restoration measures that needs to be implemented to make the augmentation effective. So if you go to the next slide, this is what is going to happen in the next 5 years. First of all, we are going to cap the license. So the Environment Agency requested affinity water to prevent the deterioration of the current condition to cap the license. The license, you can see in red, basically will pass from 14.8 as a group average, 14.8 megaliters a day, to 14.14. And this will be effective basically from 2024. And then there will be the augmentation scheme and river restoration. In addition to that, I put in that box that for operational reason, all our obstruction in the catchment, they have a physical constraint. So basically, we have to reduce the obstruction when groundwater level goes below a certain level. For our particular reason, not to comply with the regulator for our particular reason. So every time in like late summer, mid-autumn, we usually decrease the obstruction from 14, we go down to 10, 11. This is for our own choice. If you go to the next slide, the second intervention, so first, obviously capping obstruction is the augmentation scheme. This is a draft because the augmentation scheme has been fully defined, but is on a, let's say, definition phase. So we are going to put the borehole at the Anglian water side, which is the red, sorry, the black, so the blue square down, and then this will be a pipeline from there going along the river and discharging a couple of locations which are indicated with a triangle. And there will be also a creation of a wetland, which is the green area just outside the Anglian compound. And if you go to the next slide, this is the river restoration will be included in the package. As I said, the wetland will be created basically with the intention to mitigate the current discharge of stormwater from the station, Anglian. So there is a culvert discharging all the stormwater from Bulldog in that point, and this brings siltation and brings obviously water quality issue. The wetland, it will have the function of mitigate the siltation and also to try to buffer the water quality. And then there will be a channel narrowing. So the channel is recognized to be too wide to be natural, and we intend to remove the silt which is present at the moment and use it to build a narrow in the banks. And then also it is important to create bypass on the structure. There is in particular the structure at Whitehorse Farm that basically is creating problem. So we would like to create a bypass to basically to allow fish passage. And if you go to the next slide, I will go more in details about the timeline. This is built by my colleagues that is managing the project. But in essence, it's important to mention that here we plan to deliver the river restoration around 2022, but the augmentation scheme itself hopefully will be delivered by spring next year. So in time before putting into action next summer. This is the time scale that my colleague gave to me. So the augmentation borehole and the pipeline to discharge should be ready by spring next year. Next slide. And this is the reason why we initially planned for 0.4 megaliters a day. So the main reason was that this was obviously based on field measurements, and the 0.4 megaliters a day is a figure that has been given to the environmentation, from the environmentation to us for planning purposes. So we needed to put a broad figure for our WinUp spreadsheet in 2018. And the intention is to refine this number further on in AMP7. The idea how to refine it was to try to refine the groundwater model and also recalculate these target values. At the moment, the current groundwater model gives an environmental flow indicator, a Q95 of 0.54, which is not far from 0.4. For information, for those that don't know, the environmental flow indicator basically is an estimated values of the flow that should have the river in low flow conditions, so Q95, to support a good ecological status. By just an indication, so it's not a real target, it needs to be refined, as well as 0.4. To give you an idea of what is 0.4, if you go to the next slide, I'll put you here a few pictures. So this is the first top left is December 17, abstraction was 10.9 megaliters and it was completely dry. After it was a Christmas snowfall, we measured 0.4. So this is similar to what we intended to discharge at the spring area. This is the spring area near the culvert, near the bridge. And the other two, you have, again, December 19, completely dry, abstraction 12.9, and the flow 1 month after, so the recharge kicked in and started to recharge the aquifer and groundwater level increase was to 0.2. If you go to the next slide, yeah, so this is an hydrograph representing groundwater levels, so the blue dark line with the red dots, at the spring area. So we did a bore in 2015, and this is the hydrograph. The yellow and the clear blue are the flow plotted on the right axis in megaliters a day. So the yellow one is the first packaging point at the other spring, and the clear blue is the Whitehorse farm. So this is partially go with the question that Bernard asked. So you can see that obviously both they almost get dry at the same time, but the flow at the Whitehorse farm is much higher than the first packaging point. The main reason why it's higher is because the river at that point received a contribution from the lakes at Mr. Smith area. And you can see that basically the flow went up to roughly 6 megaliters a day in 2018, and this year in springtime it went around 4.5. This with the abstraction on, but there were periods when you were completely dry. So what I can see here and what these 5 years data tell me is that there is a trigger, clear trigger, seems very consistent. So every time groundwater level goes below 54.2 meter above ordinary datum, the spring gets dry. So the idea initially was to try to link the augmentation scheme, so when to start the pump and augment the river with this trigger. Now, about using a trigger based on groundwater levels or using a trigger based on flow, personally, I don't have any problem with that because both flow and groundwater level seem extremely correlated. So whatever you use is fine in principle. About what should be the flow trigger or the groundwater trigger, this is something that we need to discuss. If you go to the next one, thank you. This is another hydrograph of groundwater levels of the only historic observation bureau we have in the catchment is Radwell, just further downstream of where Richard Meredith is, and is an historic one. And you can see that now, so the last point on the right, we are on average condition somehow in the catchment. So this gives you an idea of what is the aquifer level in the catchment, not only at the spring. But you can see in 2019, it was quite dry, and it was very similar to what happened in previous year, in for instance, in 2006 and in other periods similar. Obviously, in 1996, it seemed to went worse, and the 1990 as well, which is the period reference for the groundwater model, is likely to be worse. And if I use this hydrograph, if you go to the next slide, to tell you if we use that particular groundwater trigger, how often is likely to be active this augmentation scheme. So this is again the same line before, but plotted in the other border hydrograph. You can see that in theory the augmentation scheme is likely to be triggered almost every year around autumn time, maybe switch it off very early the year after, so January, February time is a maximum. But obviously this is subject to what kind of trigger we will use at the end. If you go to the next slide, yeah, there's a summary. So in essence, what we're going to do first is capping the license from 2024 onward to prevent the deterioration of the current status. Then there are two other schemes going to be implemented. One is the river restoration, and the aim is to improve the ecology of the spring area and to mitigate the effect of these stormwater discharges from Bulldog. And then the augmentation scheme, the aim is to mitigate the effect of the extraction on the spring and try to shorten or prevent the period of dryness of the spring area. Now, in terms of what I wanted to highlight is that so the 5 years data that we collected suggests that for dry period, regional dry periods, more severe what is, for instance, 2019, the spring would have been dry even without the abstraction, the fuel and body abstraction. Obviously, as I said, this is an extrapolation, but what these 5 years of data suggests that in a more naturalized condition, is my opinion, the spring would have been dry for severe regional drought. Needs to confirm, obviously couldn't be confirmed because we didn't switch off the abstraction during this 2019 drought, for instance, or anything more severe, we didn't collect data. This 0.4 megaliters a day proposed for planning purposes is close to what is the environmental flow indicator for low flow condition given by the groundwater model, but obviously it needs to be refined and need to be discussed further. It's important to mention two things. One is the presence in the early days. So historically, there was reed beds at the top of the catchment where the springs are managed by Anglian Water, and they used to treat the effluent of Baldock and discharge into the Anglia. This is for conversation from many people, but also I had conversation with people in Anglia that confirmed that that pumping station was designed to treat the effluent and discharge into the highway. This was making the catchment a cycle close. Basically, the water extracted from affinity then was treated and discharged in the same catchment. In the 1960s, roughly, Anglian Water relocated this treatment and put it in Whitehorse. And at the moment, they only have this stormwater discharging and also emergency sewerage overflows in Bulldog. And what they told me is that they don't have currently intention to restate the treatment at Baldock pumping station. And about the development, the proposed development, basically they said that this has been considered, but it's not been included in this next 5 years investment plan because apparently hasn't been granted the planning permission yet. And at the moment, Underwater has as investment only the option to upgrade the storage and the pumping capacity. And this needed has been fully confirmed. It will depend what is they need somehow. There was, so to answer the Bernard question about the roughly 5, if we wanted to link our abstraction to the flow at the Black Horse farm. So my opinion is that we should link the augmentation scheme to the flow at Black Horse farm. The exact figures need to be refined and discussed. And we can link to the flow, we can link it to groundwater. I have no problem with that. And I guess actually there was also a question about was the affinity water intention in terms of surface water storage that was put in the email. So we included another couple of slides that my colleague Richie could go through. If you go to the next slide.
Thanks, Alessandro. Yeah, if you just skip to the next slide, please. Great. Okay, so what we do as water companies, taking a slightly different topic here, is a water resource management plan, and it's commonly referred to as a WRMP, and it effectively balances or helps us balance supply and demand over a statutory period of 25 years, but Affinity actually went a bit further, and we went up to 60 years. So what we recognize in the short term is that we need to bring kind of demand management levels, so PCC, as you've often heard, or per capita consumption, to a standard level, and reduce our leakage as well. But as time goes on, we do recognize that we need to balance that. So it's the old kind of don't put all your eggs in one basket. We need to balance the demand side with the supply side. And as we've talked about at length here, groundwater is kind of part of a longer term abstraction reduction strategy that we've announced our CEO and our chairman recently to end unsustainable abstractions from kind of chalk stream areas. So we're looking at alternatives to that. And in the Affinity supply area, there are really no supply alternatives. So we're looking further afield. What you can see on the slide there in front of you is a map of England, obviously, and Wales, with a series of kind of tube map-like schematics on it. And this is a number of different supply schemes that we're looking at as a collective industry. With regards to Affinity Water, we are looking at a shared reservoir with Anglian Water and a subsequent transfer into the Affinity area. With Thames Water, we're looking at a shared reservoir with Thames Water and a transfer into the Affinity area. And we're also looking with Severn Trent Water to bring water from the West Midlands region down to the Affinity Water region using existing infrastructure in the form of the Grand Union Canal. So we're looking at a number of potential alternative solutions at this stage as part of the WRMP, as I say, to see what could be an alternative solution to the current unsustainable chalk abstractions. I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback there. Yeah, so we're looking at a number of different options, and that's been facilitated by the regulators. So there's a new regulator kind of collective being put in place, and that's the Environment Agency, DWI, and Ofwat. The three together are named RAPID, and that's the Regulatory Alliance for the Progression of Infrastructure Development. And basically, there's a group of regulators who oversee all of this schemes that you can see on the page there now. And it works through a gated process. So a significant portion of money was made available for the next 5 years. And how that works is schemes individually go up to the gate. And the first gate is in July of next year. And you're given 10% of the overall funding to work through those 15 months up until July next year. If the scheme is still feasible, and given the work that you've done, you can progress into the next gate and so on until the scheme becomes a viable alternative. If you can just skip to the next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so there's two maps here, and I'm not going into too many details because there's been a lot of slides, and this is the last slide we have here. But effectively on the right-hand side, you have one of those alternatives. or one of these routes into our area. The kind of outlined black area, for those who aren't aware, is the affinity water supply area. The green line is effectively the Grand Union Canal. So what we're looking at the top end of that Grand Union Canal, you can see one of the insets are a number of different kind of sub-operation routes, they're called, that we need to appraise and assess as which one would be the best. Then water into the Grand Union Canal from areas of surplus in the West Midlands and bring it down to areas where we need it in our affinity supply area. On the left-hand side of your slide, it's more of a point source schematic type diagram, and this shows a step back, and this is more regional. So you can see a kind of salmon pink color in the top of, or kind of northeast of the map there. That's the affinity water supply area. So that shape maps on the right hand side diagram. What the other areas are shown are in yellow Thames water, and then in kind of different shades of green southern and southeast water. Orange is certainly Surrey. And this is a regional picture, and this is how we're kind of managing water resources going forwards into up to the 2100s. So for the next 80 years. And we're looking at better interconnectivity between regions and between companies. So it's not just in that one isolation. This is Affinity Water's view. This is deemed to be a regional problem now. And that's the steer from the regulators. So we need consistency across the region. So that was a brief whistle-stop tour, and that just kind of shows that, yes, we recognise that we want to end unsustainable abstraction, but where we do that successfully, we do still need to bring in water for our customers from somewhere, which then drives the issue elsewhere. Thanks very much.
Michael, you're muted. You're still muted. Let me send you a message.
Right, is that better?
Yes.
Right, well, I'll start again for the third time. Thank you guys for that presentation. It was a bit of a gallop through, was it not? And some of it was, or most of it was difficult to understand. So I wonder if we could have copies of the slides that were shown. Perhaps if you just
I've got the meeting in here. Leave me alone. I know it's boring, but Jasmine.
Simon,
Yes.
Simon, your microphone's on.
So Michael, to answer the question, yeah, we can give the slides.
Okay.
Maybe
right.
Yes.
Send them to one central source. We can distribute it.
Chair, I have them, Chair, so I can send them out to
okay.
people.
Can you include the revival group as well, please, Hilary?
Yes.
With them. Thank you very much. Before I go out and ask members for any questions, do the Environment Agency wish to add anything here?
I don't think we've got anything to add to Affinity Water's presentation, Chair, but we do have our own presentation to deliver to yourself and the other members and guests.
So I didn't quite get that.
We weren't intending to add anything to Affinity Water's presentation. However, we do have our own presentation to talk.
That's what I'm looking for. Yeah. Would you like to do that now, and we'll ask questions of both of you afterwards?
Yes, of course. Well, let me kick off. My name's Rob Bakewell. I'm the Drought Project Manager in East Anglia, and I'm here tonight with my colleagues Ian Page and Matt Ramscar. You've asked us generally about the issues with chalk streams, so I'm going to touch on that to start with, before letting my more technical colleagues go into some detail about the augmentation scheme that's been proposed. Sharon made a really good point earlier on and talked about chalk streams as our country's Amazon. And I've heard that phrase shared and that opinion shared numerous times. And I appreciate the level of concern that goes with that description. However, when it comes to the chalk streams, my first sort of question around it is, what level of environmental protection do they currently enjoy? Now, there's somewhere over 225 chalk streams in the country, and we know that somewhere north of 80% of all chalk streams globally. We know they're a very rare, special place in their own right. Of those 225 plus, 9 are classified as treble SIs, sites of special scientific interest, and a further, and of those, there's 4 which are SAC, special areas of conservation. So they have a certain level of extra protection for the specific flora and fauna that's there. All of the other rivers, including the Ivor, enjoy the same legislative protection as every single other surface water and groundwater body in England. And that is to say, the Water Framework Directive. Now, the way the Water Framework Directive works, there's basically two elements to it. One is to seek to achieve good ecological status, as they call it. And the other is, if we can't do that, we at least prevent deterioration in status. Now, the Water Framework Directive came in 2004, and that kicked off a whole body of work that looked to understand the water environment that we were living in and making use of. We've investigated all these water bodies, all the issues and problems that they might have, and identified and confirmed those problems. From that, we carry out what's called an options appraisal. So basically, to fix a problem, there may be a number of different ways of addressing the issue. And we need to do an options appraisal to see what's technically feasible, to see what would work, to see what costs might be associated. And from that, we can identify, if you like, a preferred approach, and that goes forwards. Now, alongside these with WFD, you can see on gov.uk river basin management plans. And for ourselves, we come under the Anglian River Basin Management Plan. And the plan sets objectives for all those different water bodies, chalk streams, surface water bodies, and groundwater bodies. It doesn't differentiate chalk streams because, as I say, they're treated exactly the same as all other rivers. Now, those objectives are what we call translated into a series of measures or actions, if you prefer, that have to pass a cost-benefit test. Every cost-beneficial measure to address any identified problem then goes into a document called the WINEP, the Water Industry Natural Environment Programme. And from the WINEP, the water companies will draft their water resource management plans and will go for approval by Ofwat. Now, the key words I've used there and the real challenging words I've used there are cost-benefit test. In this country, we appear to value water very low. We use a lot of water. In the east of England, I've seen figures ranging from 140 litres per person per day, all the way up to, I recently heard someone talking about over 170 litres per person per day, which means we're all part of the problem. And when we look at these challenges affecting chalk streams, abstraction is undoubtedly a major part of it, but so is society's appetite for water. So is pipe leakage, not only from the water companies, which we've all heard about, but also from within our own homes, our own properties and businesses. Then add on the challenges associated with new development, new housing, new businesses, and all the growth that we see in the country. Every new person, every new consumer adds to the problem. So that's kind of setting the scene with chalk streams, and it looks pretty bleak. But the good news, there's a huge amount of focus on chalk streams nationally, which has put them higher on the agenda than ever before. 3 or 4 years ago, hardly anybody was talking about chalk streams. And now nearly everybody is, including local authorities, MPs, DEFRA or government. The MPs had their first all-party parliamentary group meet the other day, for instance, and I'm really hoping that we're going to see some really good stuff come from them. Now, we are still in the process of delivering these actions that we've identified through the WINEP with the water companies. You've heard Alessandro detailing in great detail a whole range of activities and projects that we're involved with. And of course, we're actually here to discuss one of those in more detail. So this is going on not just in the Ivor catchment, but in catchments all around the country where such problems are identified. Does it go far enough? That's going to depend on your point of view. Does it go as far as our powers allow us to go? Yes, absolutely. When we look at the cost of moving or removing entirely, as some people have said to me, a public water abstraction, we use a cost of £2.2 million per megalitre per day. So if you look at a 100 megalitre abstraction, it's a very simple case of mathematics and arithmetic. To work that out, it turns into a very large figure very quickly. And there's no guarantee that an alternative source of supply will be available. And that leads us on to these longer term solutions that our affinity friends have just been talking about. Now, there were a couple of questions posed to me. So before I hand across to my technical colleagues, if I can just address the question from Sharon, and thank you for that, Sharon. If Affinity were to agree to augment the Ivor Springs with a higher figure, would we accept or approve? Unless there's an environmental reason that we would not approve, then, effectively Affinity Water can put as much water into that scheme as they wish. It's going to come out of their existing licence levels, so it's not going to add to the problem. It's going to divert their existing allowance of water into a new place. So unless my technical colleagues want to shout at me right away, then I don't think we would have a major problem with that. That's fine. And Chair, you also said, why haven't we replied to the council since our last meeting? We've been waiting for an invite to this meeting, sir. And in the meantime, as well as all responding to the challenges that COVID-19 has been brought along to us all, we've also been responding to prolonged and developing dry weather in other parts of our area. So apologies if you're expecting an earlier response, but we've been waiting for our invitation, sir. Now, if I could pass on the baton to Ian. Ian, would you like to take us through the slides, please?
Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. And I think you set up the situation very well. That if we look at it on an overarching scale of the area, that we know we're dealing with legacy issues of abstraction licensing, which started in the 1960s, where there were very different views on what the environmental needs were. And it's we've known for many years, and for those of you who have followed water resources from what were deemed catchment abstraction management strategies, now abstraction licensing strategies, we know that many of our, well, for us, most of our groundwater bodies and rivers are over licensed, over abstracted. And that's played out with the River Basin Management Plan. So if you haven't looked at that, please do. But as the slide we've got up at the moment, if you can see, that just shows the area we're dealing with the chalk aquifer. Obviously, the chalk aquifer extends through to the Chilterns, Oxford, and on. But that's where Rob and I are dealing with. But yes, we know all of those groundwater bodies for the west of our area are failing presently to meet their environmental objectives. They're poor status in the River Basin Management Plan. That's a fact. We can't deny that. The cost of addressing that has been deemed disproportionately too high as it is. What we are trying to do is deal with the surface water bodies, and the Ival on the graph is an example of that, to get them towards supporting the good ecological status. If we could move on to the next slide, please. It's just to show the Ival, and we're covering ground that we've done through Alessandro's presentation. But it's a chalk-fed catchment, spring-fed. One of the important issues is that the flows in the section that we're looking upstream of Henlow, there is no long-term flow gauging station, and that's not uncommon. We can only put in so much monitoring everywhere, and I think one of the big things that the River Basin plans has shown us is that we've had to focus on looking at getting flow assessments at the points we measure. But whilst the Henlow assessment point may be passing its flow assessment, it doesn't necessarily mean that headwaters are fine. And I think that's one thing that we do need to address, and that's something we're looking at. And through the work that's been done over many years, it's recognised that the Ival Springs were an area of concern locally, and investigation was done to look into that. So I think another key point is they were modelled flows, so we don't have any actual long-term gauge records. We've looked at the model flows, we've come up with our best estimation of what we think the natural flows, and therefore what flow would expect an ecology of a natural chalk stream to be. But we have to recognise that it's a heavily modified system, and that is a difficult thing. It's a complex problem. If we could move on to the next one, but it's what we've come up with is that if you want to get the Ival Springs section close to where it needs to be, then yes, you need to reduce abstraction, undoubtedly. And we're putting in measures to cap licenses to at least prevent things getting worse. You need to look at restoring the river to a more natural state if you want to be, getting flows back to where it would support that natural system. And it is a heavily modified system. River augmentation and river support came out as the most cost beneficial measure of dealing with the situation of an over-abstracted catchment. That's where we are with the measures that we have to hand. Those river flow requirements and what the actual support ends up is still to be decided. So Affinity has put forward a proposal of 0.4 megalitres, I think, based on some observation. That will be refined once we get operational experience of the scheme itself. And it's not necessarily the end result, but I think there's a bigger question of what is the end result itself. And that really is a big question of, do we want natural chalk rivers? Do we want chalk rivers that have been modified over hundreds of years worth of human intervention? It really moves on to the last slide, please, is in terms of where we are. Probably what we've done to date is as much probably as we can do under the present way of working. And if we want to get chalk streams to where many people think they should be, it's going to need a step change. And that step change is going to require significant investment and probably significant reductions in abstraction. we've done some work, and my colleague Matt here was heavily involved with that, looking at, if you were to meet the environmental flow targets of all of the rivers across the area that we work in, and you're only going to do that through reducing abstraction and not by river support, which I know is controversial in some sectors, but that's a historical legacy issue, then you're probably looking at reductions in the order of 60% across all sectors. And that comes with its own issues and its own costs. But we are, I think that's the information that needs to be fed into the regional plans. And this slide is really flagging up one of the best opportunities to have a step change in how we deal with things. And whatever your thoughts on whether it will work or not, I think it's worth, exploring and pushing, because, you're not going to get the changes that are required to have naturally functioning systems, probably, unless you have significant reductions in groundwater abstraction. And that's what our evidence is pointing towards. To do that, it's going to take a lot of money, a lot of time to develop the alternatives. Should that stop us? Probably not, no. But it's to have that conversation to say, if we want to get towards more natural flowing systems, then this is the level of abstraction reduction potentially that's needed. But to feed that into the regional plans to say, okay, well, how do you replace that water to maintain not only, the needs of growth, but the needs of present society, and to build it in. And I think a key thing is, whereas perhaps historically we've looked at sustainability reductions, as they're called, so looking at abstraction licenses, what do you need to change them to protect this river or that wetland? Looking more holistically to say, okay, if you've got to build a reservoir to meet the needs of growth, climate change resilience, growth, infrastructure, etc., if you're doing that anyway, is building it a bit bigger or putting in more infrastructure on the basis of meeting the needs of reducing pressure on chalk streams or other streams, it's not just chalk streams, we've got to look at everything, then let's look at it through those routes. So I think, I can't impress enough, if you're not involved with these regional plans, and for particularly this area, although you're based in Water Resources East, and we can send the links through, Affinity in particular straddles Water Resource East and Water Resource South East just by virtue of geography of the company's network. It's really important to get those, get that input into those projects, because in my 20 plus years of working in the water industry, this is the biggest chance for a step change that we've had. And it doesn't guarantee it, but I think it guarantees having that conversation. So please do get involved. Unless Matt, Rob have got anything else, I'll keep quiet.
Thank you, Ian. Did Matt want to say anything?
No, I could just briefly describe a bit about how we've calculated some of the flows using the model. I think we've talked about a flow of 5 megalitres a day at Black Horse Farm as being a sort of desirable target to aim at. What we do in the models is essentially we take a historical run where we try to reproduce what's been observed across the scope of the models, which is actually pretty large. They're regional models, and we will then try and calibrate, i.e. match the model to that. When it comes down to what we set our target at, we obviously want to get away from the current situation, which is the abstracted environment and the effect that abstraction has had on these chalk streams, to something more natural. And so to do that, we remove all the abstractions and discharges, and we get a naturalized flow, which is the best we can produce to say what the river should be flowing at naturally. And if you look at the sort of area we're talking about for this support scheme, okay, you might get up to sort of 5 megalitres a day at Q30. So when we describe flows in a river, we use something called a flow duration curve, and Q30 is the flow that you would expect to be exceeded 30% of the time. So it's relatively high flow. So that might be more like 5 megalitres a day. But when you get down to Q95, i.e. the flow that would be exceeded 95% of the time, it's more like 0.5, 0.8 of a megalitre a day. So that is really where the target for the river support scheme has come from. And it's worth just mentioning about river support schemes and what they're intended to do. The idea is to top up the river at critical times. And most ecologists will tell you that the lowest flows are the most important for the ecology. And so this scheme would be just putting a little bit of water in to keep the ecology going at these most critical times. If you use it regularly, it becomes part of the problem, because if you've got something pumping continually, it will start to create its own sort of cone of depression, draw more water in, and eventually you just get a big recirculation problem. So I'd be happy to answer any more questions on the modelling, but I just thought I'd add that little bit of clarification.
Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing further from the presenters, I go over to members. Looking for questions, please, of the two agencies here today. Members, Michael Muir.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions. First of all, why did the Environment Agency agree earlier this year that a local farmer can extract water for a small reservoir against your stated aims of capping obstruction licenses? Question 1. Question 2, affinity water. I believe the River Chess is a chalk stream, and I believe that no obstruction is now being done from that river. If affinity water can do that for the River Chess, why can't it be done or reduced obstruction for the River Ivor now? The third question, Bulldog is about to have, if the local plan is agreed, 3,591 houses around Baldock. 2,800 of the houses will be opposite the River Ivor, north of Baldock. The other 591 around Clothall Common. Now, is the rain and surface water going to be designed to go back into the river? One would need more reed beds to filter out contaminants. So what is going to happen in the long term with all these extra houses? Thank you.
I don't know who wants to answer that.
I'm happy to answer the question about a new license. If a new license had been granted, and I can point people towards our abstraction licensing strategies. If it was a new license from, well, there wouldn't have been any new water from the groundwater, which is principally linked to the springs. If it was a new water from the river, so surface water as we would call that, it would come with an appropriate condition that said if the flow drops below X, you cannot abstract, and that X is set at a level that not only protects the environment, but protects existing abstractors, so we don't derogate from them. If the member feels that that's not been the case, please let us know as soon as possible.
So what you're saying is that in view of all these houses, there has to be more extraction.
Well, not in that sense. That was just in terms of if you wish
Well,
for a new license.
What are you
But
granting a
if
license
for new houses, I think what we're saying is, any new houses, we would look at it in terms of does growth in abstraction or growth in development lead to a growth in abstraction? And if that abstraction is from the groundwater, then, and as we've said in other local plan areas, the companies have their own duties to ensure that their operations or changes to their operations don't cause deterioration. And I think it's an important point that, particularly under the River Basin plan, whilst it may be disproportionately costly to get things back to good, we have a duty to not let things get any worse. So if you have growth, then that growth needs to be provided from sustainable sources. And if those sources are going to increase pressure on an already failing system, then that poses a risk to deterioration that needs to be assessed.
Sorry, can I just take you back to you're talking about a possible new license. What would that license give the agency permission to do?
Well, a new license would be, there's no new groundwater available.
No.
And that's been a policy for probably 20 years. There's still, in most places, new surface water, so river water available, but it would come with the condition that you can only take the water when flows are above a certain level. And that level is set that protects the environment. So it's quite restrictive, and you're probably looking at winter water or very high flows, and increasingly so. So there will always be water available. It almost comes down to whether the license holder is willing to accept the reliability that, you'll have a condition where, you'll be told, well, you can abstract this day, but you can't the next because of the flows. So it's river surface water is infinitesimally easier to control because we can say the flows are X. We know the river needs X minus whatever to protect the ecology. When flows are above that, fill your boots. When they're not, you have to stop. With groundwater, you get very varying lag times, and it's harder to predict. We haven't allowed new groundwater for many years, but there will always be surface water available if people are willing to accept the reliability issues.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone prepared to answer the question of the river Chet?
Yeah, I can answer the question, and this is Alessandro.
Okay.
So obviously the river chest, there was an investigation in AMP6 as well as for the Highwell, but the river chest option of reducing or basically suspending the abstraction was already put in our planning in 2018-19. So basically when you do the planning for the next 5-year cycle, you put what it could be the sustainability reduction for this, for instance, AMP7, and for the chest, it was put as a hamburger color, which means that is likely to happen, or it could happen. And for the Iver catchment, we agreed around 2018, as I said, to cap the license to recent actual. So the difference is for the chest, Affinity Water asked funds to address the problem of reducing the abstraction by investing more in infrastructure to bring water from other sources from water demand areas. While for the Iver, this is not present in the current 5-year cycle. So if we have to stop the abstraction now, as we did for the chest, you create a deficit that cannot be immediately addressed through the fund that we have available for these 5 years. And that's the main reason. So it will create a deficit for our water resource management plan, which is relying on these 14 roughly megaliters for the next 5 years to meet the demand.
Okay, thank you, Alexandra. And the final question from Councillor Muir was in relation to a local farmer who built a reservoir. It seems to me a reservoir is different to extraction, but perhaps someone can answer that question.
If I can start off at least, if it was a reservoir that was dealing with surface water abstraction, so abstraction from the river, and as I said before, that in the winter there is water available once flows get above a certain level. So, you know, that's one of the few new sources of water that are available. That license, if it was issued recently, would have been issued with a flow constraint that said, if flows drop below X, you cannot take. If it's above that, then fine. So that should have been sustainable. And it's very different to the groundwater issue. So there will be water available if you can deal with the reliability.
So it would have been licensed, wouldn't it?
Can I come in there?
Yes, if they had, yeah. Otherwise, it would be an enforcement issue. But yes, I'm assuming it would have been.
If the farmer's looking to fill a reservoir, it's going to be something of a size above what we call the de minimis value for being licensed to abstract. That de minimis is 20 cubic meters per day, and a farmer's going to get through that sort of quantity very, very quickly. So in our experience, farmers and many businesses will have an abstraction license if they're taking from either a surface water source or a groundwater source. As Ian said, we don't license groundwater abstraction of any new water, and haven't done since the early 2000s, late 90s, that sort of period. For this farmer, and we do encourage farmers to consider changing their historical licenses away from summer abstractions to what we call a winter fill license. And again, as Ian's mentioned, you can imagine where the river is flowing at higher levels, possibly due to a storm, or, you know, goodness only knows, perhaps we actually get a wet winter one year. Then when those levels are above that restriction point, then they'll be able to access it. Although, as Ian says, that farmer would have to accept that those flows are not always going to be available. If we have a drier winter, they may never get to that point when we would allow them to abstract. So to take the water, they have to have an abstraction license, and that abstraction license is a legal document. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Tom, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, that's correct. You did say that the members of the revival group wouldn't be able to ask any questions in the follow-up to the presentations, so and that I should do it on their behalf. So I'm afraid you're going to have to accept me as a conduit for their questions now, of which there are several. First of all, one from me. This is for Alessandro. The photograph that you showed in your first slide, could you tell me where that was taken?
Yeah, so the photograph was taken at the first engaging point, which is near the spring at the culvert. So if you are familiar, I guess, with the...
Yeah, I am.
So there is a culvert where there is a footbridge that you can cross it. So there is the first point where we measure every month the flow.
Okay.
Exactly.
I was there at 2 o'clock this afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
So presumably about the same time that you took your photograph.
And I think it was, we spaghetti it, I think last Thursday.
Oh, right. I thought it said October the 5th on this slide.
Yeah, I think it was 3rd, sorry.
Okay.
I made a
At the
mistake.
moment, today, I can tell you the water level upstream of the culvert isn't high enough to get anything through the culvert. And there's literally just a trickle on the other side. So you couldn't really describe there as any significant flow taking place there at all. The pool that's on the upstream side of the culvert is actually stagnant at the moment, or it was.
Yeah, in fact, this is 0. So it's representing the graph as dry.
Yeah.
But there is no flow in the spring since July. And I'm expecting to come back maybe around hopefully in November, late November, December time. So it's likely they will be dry until that time, even if there is a high rainfall, because the area is almost only groundwater fed. The rainfall doesn't change much the condition.
Okay. I've been asked to question the figure that you mentioned about reducing the abstraction rate from 20 to 14 megalitres. Has there actually ever been a quantity of 20 megalitres taken from the borehole?
So the 20 megalitres is the peak license. Group peak license means that our abstraction, they don't take usually 20 megalitres. Is a peak which is available for us if we need for demand supply, for usually in a very high demand period, maybe for a few days. But the average value, so at the end of the year, at the moment, we are allowed to take only 14.8. So obviously, if you one day you take 20, then another day you have to take less than 14, because otherwise you don't match at the end of the year, don't comply with the license. And
technically, it's possible to take 20.
Yes, I mean, it's challenging for us also from the operational perspective. For sure, we cannot take 20 during this period, because as I said, by late summer and mid-autumn, usually we reduce the abstraction because the levels at the bores are at a certain point that we cannot go any further down, otherwise we risk collapsing of the structures. So we can take 20 only under exceptional circumstances and when groundwater level is very high.
Okay.
As far
which obviously it hasn't been for quite a long time, has it?
Quite a long time. If I remember, in terms of abstraction, I don't think we never met in the last, I don't know, 10, 15. I have to check the graph, but I don't think we used to go to 20 megaliters.
No.
For several years.
So it's a notional reduction rather than an actual one, isn't it?
No, the reduction. No, I think because the reduction is not from 20 to 14. It's from 14.8. which is usually done, to 14.14.
I see.
And so there is an effective reduction, so we will not be able to operate as we are doing at the moment, but it's not a massive reduction. It's just reduction, as Ian said, to prevent deteriorating the current condition.
Thank you. The next question was about flow measurements. And I think you said that you measure once a month at that culvert by the springs. And the question is, how can you guarantee that you've got an accurate relationship between the borehole level and the water flow if there isn't permanent gauging of the flow taking place?
So I would say that, so when you deal with this sort of measurements and the hydrogeology and hydrology itself, the accuracy is always something that you can try to do your best and to work with what you have. Ideally, yes, you would like a perfect working historic flow gauging that we don't have. And the monthly measuring was quite a big effort for 5 years in terms of time and cost resources. My personal feeling is that the accuracy between groundwater levels and flow is quite good compared to many other catchment, many other data sets that we have. This is extremely robust, extremely good. And I think the graph that I showed you where you can correlate every time groundwater level goes below a certain trigger, the spring gets dry, it speaks alone. So I feel quite confident about that. Huh?
Yeah.
Obviously, there's always a limitation. I mean, you're talking about with the limited resources and data.
Well, one of the things that would be well received is if that there were a flow gauge to be constructed, such as the one at Ashwell Springs, so that we had a reliable and continuous monitoring of the flow rates.
So I don't know if I mentioned it, but one of the intervention is this bypass of this weir at Whitehorse farm. And I think we agreed with Richard that it is sensible to put a measuring flow there. So it will be part of the intervention that we are going to put it. Now, how sophisticated will be the device and how accurate it will be, I don't know. We have to consider the resources and the logistic, but the idea is to have a continuous flow measuring at Whitehorse farm.
Okay, well, that's good. Then the other quite contentious area, of course, is that figure of 0.4 megalitres for the augmentation, where obviously, an optimum amount that's been discussed is 5 megalitres. And can I ask Matt just to go back over that figure about the Q30 and explain how it is that was the corresponding relationship between the 5 megalitres. What was that based on? I know it was done by modelling and taking away abstraction, etc. But how did you get the figure of the 30%?
Well, no, that's a Q30 flow. So when you have a flow duration curve, you characterize the flow of a river over a set period. And in this case, it was 1990 to 2006 in the model. So you can run the model with historical abstraction in it. And you can get a flow duration curve for that. You can take all the abstraction and discharges away and run the model again, and you'll get a naturalized flow. And that is as near as we can get to what the river would have been doing naturally. So it's important to say it's not natural. No one knows exactly what that is, but we take all the abstractions and discharges out of the model, run it, and that's as close as we can get. So on the flow duration curve, you have set points of flow. And so Q95 is what flow would be above 95% of the time. So it's a pretty low flow. Q30 is what the flow would be above 30% of the time. So that in contrast is a pretty high flow. So the Q30 naturalized in one of the cells that I picked out on the river. I think it's quite close to the bottom of where the support scheme would be. It gives a Q30 naturalized of about 4.8 megalitres a day, so near enough 5. Correspondingly for that cell, the Q95, so very down the lowest end, is more like 0.8. And with a support scheme, what you're trying to do is just top up the river when these very low flows should be occurring and aren't because of abstraction.
Yeah, sorry, but I understood. I understood what the figures meant. I just wasn't capable of explaining my question very.
Sorry, did I not answer?
No, it was just really about how those figures were arrived at rather than what they were.
Yeah.
Anyway, because I mean locally people are very much of the opinion that the 5 megalitre flow would be the ideal to strive for, and that's what having had mills on this stream in the past, and the watercress beds, not reed beds, as I think came up in the presentation earlier, that you would need that kind of amount of flow to feed those sort of things, and that a Q95 of 0.5 megalitres seems to be somewhat frugal.
May I just come in on that, Matt? Tom, if I can help you with that. This higher figure that's been calculated, and I've heard reference to mills and watercress beds, and I've heard talk of fishing and pools and things like this. One of the questions that we consider is how reflective is that information of current society? So, are we looking at something that's 50 years ago? Is it 60, 70, further beyond? Does it reflect not only the population you have around your area at the moment? Forgive me, I don't know Baldock well enough for population figures, but also we touched on personal consumption before. Does it reflect those sort of activities? The white goods that we all have in our kitchens, the dishwashers and all the rest of it. Because if we go too far back, we're risking trying to find some sort of nirvana, some chalk stream nirvana, which never really existed.
To me, that's not a risk. That's an objective.
Well, we're trying to use information that's, whether it's modelled or whether it's the flows, that is much more reflective of the current situation that yourself and your constituents and voters and the population, the lives that you all live. So we are using this model in the absence of other information. Anecdotal information can sometimes have a value, but we are using a proven model. Matt's explained the flow duration curves, and I've seen such things. You can imagine graphs on a chart paper, and at that Q30 period, when you go down to see what the flow would be, that's the number, and that's how it's calculated. So I hope that helps explain the how. And as I say, we're trying to use the most recent information we have to reflect the current pressures.
Yeah, okay, I take your point entirely. I do have to say, though, I think that, as an environmentalist, to say that our current lifestyles are affecting the environment in certain ways, which we find, to be negative, that we should be doing our utmost to combat that and counteract those effects, rather than to use them as a justification for having a substandard environment.
What I think we've heard today from the Affinity gents is that they'll, as they bring this scheme into action, we're expecting them to carry out a full engagement activities with local residents, and if we're continuing to see this support for higher numbers, and recognising that Affinity will have to provide that flow from their existing licence, because there won't be any new water to complicate matters, then if they're able to do that, and it doesn't cause any other environmental problem, which we would, obviously object to, then that's fine. This figure we're starting off with, it's using that model. It's set as a starting point, but I think we've said on a number of occasions that this will refine in the course of the activity of getting this thing built and put into place. So
I thought I'd also just highlight that under the naturalised conditions, the river flow would vary quite considerably year to year in between seasons on the level of the chalk aquifer, as most chalk streams do. And that's a pattern that you see, whether it's abstracted or not.
Yeah. I mean, locally, we're of the opinion quite firmly that the Ivel is a perennial stream, not a winterbourne, and therefore we would expect there to be flow at the springs throughout the year.
Well, I think the model is saying that. It's saying that you would get a flow at Q95 of 0.5 or 0.8, which would vary up to 5, maybe in some circumstances. But,
can I mention a couple of things, Councillor? First, the reed beds. So the reed beds was mentioned as a treatment for Anglian water discharging to the Ivel. We are aware there were watercress, So immediately downstream of the discharge, they were historically watercress. So the real better was to treat the effluent and then discharge into the highway. And about this, as I said, we are going to refine these values to answer the very first question about if affinity water is going to increase this rate, if environmentalists agree. Everybody would like to see more water in the river, discharging more. The problem is that when you decide how much you have to discharge, you have to account for many things. And as Matt said as well, if you want to increase the capacity of this borehole and discharge more water, there is a high risk of recirculation. So the more water you discharge, the more the water you have to abstract, and you will recreate basically a recirculation. It might not be effective. It might not be effective. It needs to be seen. The second one is that you do an option appraiser with certain values, and if you have to increase the capacity up to 5 megaliters, you have to put an infrastructure which has cost, which is more different from what you calculated before, and there is a carbon footprint and other environmental impact that needs to be accounted as well. So everything has to be reconsidered. We will work on this one, and we will refine it, but the fact that we don't go straight to 5 megaliters, there is a reason, because there are problems associated with that one. And if I may, I would like to ask a question about these 5 megaliters that I know has been an estimate, and as well as our estimate with the groundwater model and the measurements. What is any chance that the treated effluent that was discharged historically in the 1800 and 1900 was part of these 5 megaliters? Because there was an historic, let's say, base flow of from the treated effluent. So I wonder how much these 5 megaliter average figures could have been included as part of this discharged effluent.
Tom, do you have many more questions? Because it's getting towards, I think we ought to think about a break.
And you also have Councillor Jarvis with his hand up.
Yeah, okay, but Tom, do you have any more questions?
No, I think I'm pretty much done now. I think that the points about the scale of the augmentation and the need for a gauging station are well made now.
Thank you. Steve Jarvis.
Thank you. I think some of the questions I was going to ask have probably been dealt with. I think one of my concerns, I'm pleased to hear that there's going to be consideration to increasing the level of augmentation. And I guess the concern is that, I think as Alexander has said, clearly there will be a capacity that the borehole has to be set up for. And I'm just a little concerned that we don't land up with a borehole that doesn't provide what turns out to be reasonably the appropriate flow. So I guess how is that going to be dealt with? And the other issue is, it's my understanding, and it's a pity that Jake Rigg wasn't able to join us this evening, because my understanding from Jake was that there is an intention to substantially reduce abstraction levels by affinity over the coming years, and I understand it's not entirely clear how long. But is it reasonable to suppose that that reduction in abstraction would include areas like the island?
Well, so I guess I can try to answer this question, and I can tell you that, I mean, affinity water implemented a policy in the last few years, I don't know how to say that. As I said, we try to move on from being only 60% of our abstraction from chalk stream, but try to bring alternative. This is also mostly because we want to protect the environment, but also there is a matter of having to increase resilience as well. If in the future the reduction will come with the voluntary reduction, like this one that we are implementing in the chest, is going to be implemented in the IVL or not, to be honest, I'm not in the position to answer personally. This is a more, I would say, strategic planning level that goes beyond my expertise and my knowledge. At the very moment, I know that in this very moment we cannot do it in the IVL, but as you said, the affinity water was in 5-year cycles, so everything can be implemented in the future. Any changes for sure needs time and money and investment and discussion, as Ian said. but we are open for the future, I guess.
Thank you.
And the sizing of the augmentation?
Sorry? Anyone else want to speak,
My
Jim?
question was about the sizing of the augmentation.
Okay, yeah, so obviously when we have to drill the borehole, we have to drill it in the capacity that we want to do it, as the project is still under the design phase. And I think next week we are going to meet with the contractor on site just to show the area. So until the design phase is finished, we can always do modifications. As I said, it's not a problem of that we cannot do it because it's too late. It's the problem that if we do it, there are implications that to me, it will make the augmentation less effective, because it will basically mean bringing extra 5 megaliter abstraction in the catchment and take the water from the aquifer, put it in the river and draw it back is likely to happen.
Okay. Jim, did you want to ask any questions? Councillor McNally? Okay, well,
Thank you, Chair, but no, the questions that I have been addressed pretty much.
okay. I'm going to wind this up now anyway, and I'm going to be realistic and say that what we have is a growing population that needs more water. But at what cost? At what cost? It's down to the loss of chalk streams like this. That's one of the issues, and that's a great, great pity. So at the end of the day, from what I've heard tonight, it seems to be all down to money, doesn't it? Hope is that with the infrastructure changes that Andresso has alluded to, hopefully they will come on stream, excuse the pun, quite soon. Then we will have more water to play with. I think reducing the level at boreholes from something like 14.8 to 14.14 is going to make no difference at all. So we live in hope that we can get this infrastructure up and running as soon as possible to give us some more water. Okay.
If I may, just as a finishing statement and to council, sorry, but to say the regional plans, water sources east, water sources southeast, is the greatest opportunity to feed that into, because if we want to make that step change to say sustainable water resources in the future, and it may take 15, 20 years, I'm afraid, but that's the opportunity to feed that in and get into the environmental ambition of those plans to make that step change. So please do factor that in.
Well, that's a shame. But and the other thing is about someone suggested we build a new reservoir, perhaps in the Fens or something like that.
Well, that's part of Water Resources East. So
yeah.
You know, these are the plans that they're looking at to build new reservoirs. So there's plans for South Lincolnshire and Fenlands.
But it's not going to happen overnight.
No, it isn't. And I think that, you know, that's something we all need to understand. We know there's a problem. We've known it for a number of years. You know, we've had assessments, certainly from at least the early 2000s, is over extracted cost benefit, or, you know, the costs of solving it has been a problem. If you want to resolve it, it's going to take significant investment.
Yeah, as I said, it's all down to money.
And it, you know, that's not, it's not that it can't be done, but it's going to take time. And I think we have to have that recognition that maybe now we're starting to get to the point where we say, yes, okay, we push the button on that, but it's still going to take 10, 15 plus years to do. Should that stop us? Not necessarily, but as long as we recognise that there's no quick fix to the problem.
Meanwhile, I think I heard that the utility and your agencies said that they would do what they can to improve the flow.
Well, and I think, you know, that is what we've proposed in these plans for river support. You know, we're looking to, you know, crudely, we're saying we know it's broken, but we're looking to fix it. And this is what we can do within the realms of things. But if you really want to fix it, you're probably looking at significant reduction in groundwater abstraction, and that will come with the need for significant investment in alternative supplies, and will take time to deliver.
That's not easy, is it?
You know, that's the choice of it, and I know that's not palatable to many people, but really that's the reality of it. And
okay, thank you guys very much indeed for coming along this evening. Alessandro, Rob, Ian and Matt, and someone I've missed, I know, but it would be good if you could perhaps come back again next year and tell us what you've done, any changes, give us a little more. Would that be okay?
Very, very happy to. Yeah, and if not sooner, but yeah, you know, this is an ongoing project, and you know, we can, as we've said in the work, and I hope it's come through from both organisations.
Yes,
the work that's being done is to be decided, and that decision is in collaboration with all interested parties. So, yes, please do.
Okay, thank you all very much indeed, and thank you for the revival for joining in as well earlier. With that, I'm going to suggest or ask if anyone wants a break for 5 minutes before we carry on. I think Tom does. I see his thumbs up. So can we close down for 5 minutes? Thank you very much.
Chair. Thank you. Back. If you can all turn your cameras off and your sound off when you go, please.
Okay.
Chair, I think we've had a bit more than 5 minutes if you want to call people back.
Great.
I turned your video off, so you might want to turn it back on. Oh, you've done it. Thank you.
Just pressed it.
Yeah, thank you. Now I should do a quick roll call when people are back. Members, if you can all turn your cameras on when you're back, and I'll run through roll call. Okay. Councillor Jarvis?
Yes.
McNally? I'll come back to Councillor McNally. Councillor Muir?
Present.
Thank you.
Present, Hillary.
Thank you, Councillor McNally. Councillor Shanley? Councillor Shanley? Didn't hear you. Okay. As long as you can hear us. Councillor Tyson?
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Weeks?
Current.
Simon Ellis?
Here.
William Edwards?
Here.
I think that's probably, oh, Ashley, sorry, Ashley Hawkins.
Yes.
Thank you. I think that's everybody. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Hillary. Item 6 on the agenda, annual update on Section 106 obligations for Baldock District Committee, Simon Ellis, and hopefully it won't last an hour and 3/4.
Good evening, members. No, I won't take anything like that amount of time. I'm afraid that the report looks very similar to last year's, and we did hope to make some more progress on some of these things. But of course, we all got a bit delayed by the local plan being delayed and the hearings being scheduled in March and then bumped to October, and now possibly bumped even further to later this year. So sorry about the fact that the report looks remarkably similar to last year's. The things that have happened in the last year, though, the planning obligations supplementary planning document went to Cabinet in July and was approved subject to the resolution to adopt the plan. So the document's been prepared and is ready for the local plan to follow along. And also for December 2020, I've mentioned in the report 2 things that are going to happen in December. First of all, we have to produce a return to government on Section 106 activity across the district. It's called an infrastructure funding statement. And we have to prepare one of those every year now. And we're just starting to look at that, myself and my colleague, Stephanie Blunt. And the documents that we have to submit are pretty much how we've been monitoring Section 106 funding and activity in the last few years anyway. So it shouldn't be too difficult for us to take all the information that we report to area committees and then put that in a document and then publish that on our website in December. But discussion with the executive members, Ian Mantle and Paul Clark, is that even though we're going to be reporting every year across the whole district, all the Section 106 activity in the infrastructure funding statement, there's still a desire to continue to come to these area committees every year, because it's of more interest to area committees to look at the specific areas rather than across the entire district. So we'll continue to do that. The other thing that's going to happen in December 2020 is that my colleague Sam DeCoco with the planning policy team are looking at a business case for whether or not the council would want to introduce its own community infrastructure levy. We're looking at a business case as to whether or not it's best to continue with Section 106 agreements, or we look at a mixture of the two, or we go for almost wholly SIL. That work's ongoing, but there is a big sort of question mark over that now, and that's the white paper for Planning for the Future white paper and the legislation that's likely to come forward in the next few months, which effectively, if it transpires that it follows what's in the white paper, it would abolish financial contributions from Section 106 agreements, and it would also abolish locally set community infrastructure levies to replace by what you could call a national infrastructure levy, which would be set across the country. And what role that leaves for local authorities. Would we just be tax collectors? Would we be distributors of those funds? That's all to be seen in the detail of the legislation. But in the absence of that legislation being in place, all we can do is crack on with what we've got, and that's to look at the tools we've got available. So the future for Section 106 agreements and financial contributions is looking a bit bleak, but it's likely to be replaced with a national infrastructure levy if the white paper legislation comes through, and then specific Section 106 agreements to deal with the big sites. And I know from the last presentation, I know that there's going to be concern about the big site north of Baldock and how we deal with all of that. So we'll have to, there could be all sorts of things in the pipeline about how we deal with the infrastructure demands from that development in the future, not just in relation to water, but in relation to everything. So those are really the updates. Sorry that the report looks very similar to last year, but I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Simon. Any questions? Simon hasn't been waiting for 2 hours not to have a question. Tom?
Steve was before me, actually.
Steve Jarvis, Chair.
I beg your pardon.
Steve. Yes, I may have misread this, but my understanding is that Table 3 are the current funds. I couldn't find anything in Table 3 that wasn't in Bulldog itself. My expectation, and these are the historical pre-2015 funds, essentially, aren't they, before when they were gathered under the old way, but there doesn't appear to be anything in any of the villages, and I'm just fairly certain that there were still some outstanding contributions in the villages.
There are a few bits and pieces in some of the villages, Councillor Jarvis, and I'm afraid that accidentally got slipped into the Royston Committee papers. But I'll send those to you. There are a few left in some of the smaller villages, but unfortunately my colleague, and I noticed this the other day, and I thought you were going to ask that question actually.
I think I did ask you.
We accidentally put them in the Royston Committee in district papers. So, but I'll send those on to you and update all the other members. But there's a very small amount in some of the villages around the border of the district. So I apologise for that.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, just Simon, just one tiny thing to start with. In Table 3 on page 11, 844, there just appear to be a couple of little punctuation anomalies in the sums of money. You see what I mean? Between commas and full stops.
Simon, you're muted. Simon, if you're talking.
Sorry, yeah. So yeah, I mean, community safety project, £650 and 84 pence. It does look like 650,000 and 84. It's not. And then,
Okay, and then at the bottom, the healthcare one.
healthcare, yeah, £31,044, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then the other question I had was, I'm not sure if I can explain this very clearly, but with the new system of Section 106 forms going out to parish councils and ward members, I don't know how many of these have gone out so far. I certainly got one. I think I may have been one of the first people who was asked to contribute to that form. There's a template. I can't remember what you call it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do know what you're talking about, and that's something we've set up from last year. We set it up from January 2019. Actually, I don't know whether any of you remember. We introduced it to parishes. We did a big session in the council chamber, and there was a lot of flack from parishes saying, "Well, you know, how are we supposed to fill in these forms?" We've tried to keep it as simple as we can, but you'll see from the report that the reason why there aren't that many of them flying about is because they only relate to planning applications of more than 10 dwellings. So most villages, year in, year out, don't get that many planning applications for more than 10 dwellings. But where they do arrive, we send those forms to the parish, and it's got two sides to it. The one front is you make your comment on the planning application, warts and all, if you're against it or you're in favour of it. And then the other side is, what local projects are you aware of that you might be interested in, that if this development were to go ahead and there were to be a legal agreement, what might you want from it? So it has worked quite successfully. Some parishes have been quite good at separating those two issues. Other parishes still are of the mindset that if we're against a development, why would we want anything from it? Well, you've got to look to what you can get from development as well as just being against it. Yeah, so there's a few of those forms knocking about.
I think what I wanted to say, Simon, if you don't mind me just butting in for it, is just that I thought that the concept was great, but the practicalities of filling it out were a bit daunting, and it might have been certainly I would have found it useful, not having been party to the process that you're talking about last year, to have had some sort of idiot's guide as to what to do with it, or even perhaps a model as an exemplar of what might be expected or might be ideas to go in there.
Yeah, if I may, yeah, what I'll do is I'll send a model to Michael Weeks so that you can all take a look at how it's been done in other. Yeah, I know what you mean. It's not easy, but of course, the planning officers can't be the people that find the projects. It has to be local people, and of course it has to fit the criteria, and the criteria you can see from the report is quite complicated. Yeah. But yeah, I'll try and give a few tips, and I'll send those to the chair so that you can all see how it can be done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Anyone else? Okay, can I come in there and say, Simon, at 1.3, you rightly point out that the revised strategy seeks to include ward members more, and you've just talked about parishes. The same doesn't apply for towns, does it?
No, that's right, Michael. And the issue we've got with the towns is that we need to rely on the ward members. So what happens is we get planning applications for, say, more than 10 dwellings in a town. There's no parish. We send the ward members a letter that says there's a planning application in your area. It's for this development. Can you give the planning officers any ideas about that? Also, we use our own leisure services and our own community development officers to assist where we can. But yeah, you're right. There is a bit of a two-tier system, isn't there? That the parish has got a bit more going for it in that sense. So in the urban areas, we're going to need to look at what other intelligence we can get from elsewhere.
Your summary isn't correct then when you say the wider community and ward members' involvement in identifying relevant projects, because it doesn't apply to town members, just rural parish members. does it?
Well, no. What I'm saying is, which paragraph are you reading, Michael?
It's just the wording, really. But,
okay, I'll have a look at that. But what it means is, in the non-parished areas, we're going to use ward members, anyone we can get intel from, and our own teams in the council, community event officers.
Yeah. Okay.
We recognise that the system doesn't work brilliantly outside the parished areas.
You spoke about the annual infrastructure funding statement that you have to supply centrally. Well, that's not too onerous though on you, is it? All you do is collate what you tell each committee, isn't it? You just put it all together.
It isn't. No, it's not been onerous at all. Myself and Steph were looking at that last week, and we've been keeping a record of this. It's fairly straightforward. It's basically the same format that I use for the area reports. It's how many agreements in the financial year, how much has been received, how much has been spent. We just can't use our own spreadsheets. We have to put it on the government tablet, and then it will go on to the website in December, so that it will be a useful source of information that anyone could look at.
Okay, but you've got it all in hand anyway. Finally, Simon, and you touched on it, 814 refers to the prospect of Section 106 obligations coming to an end, to be replaced by, as you said, a national levy. Any idea when that's likely to happen?
Well,
how long is a piece
I think the difficulty we've got here at North Hertfordshire is that there's going to be transitional arrangements. So it's in the white paper, Planning for the Future. I think there's going to be a bill in the next session on these planning reforms. But we're already aware that there is a transitional arrangement, which is effectively that we have to continue with our own local plan, because the main reform that's in the idea in the white paper is that by the year 2024, all local authorities are going to have these simplified local plans, whereby when you allocate land for development, it has permission. And then from then on, you're just dealing with the details rather than having the allocation and then the planning process through development management to speed things along. So what we will need 106 agreements for a reasonable amount of time, because we will need them in relation to the strategic sites, because they will be developed under the current system. So we'll have to continue our current local plan. They don't want, so what the government don't want to happen is they don't want councils just saying, do you know what, we won't do anything now because you're going to change the whole system in 3 years' time. They want us to continue under the transitional arrangement. So there will be 106 agreements on big sites. It's for the smaller sites that it's going to be, if you have this national levy, it will be set across the whole country and we'll be the tax collector. And then it will be down to bodies and governance around how it's spent. But 106 agreements for smaller sites will be phased out over the next few.
Out of that, will the local authorities still have an input where the money is spent?
That we're not too sure. I was talking to Sam DeCoco this afternoon, because the white paper isn't clear about what the national infrastructure levy is. I would assume that you would have a nationally set levy. It would have to be collected locally and spent locally. And I would imagine that will be down to the local authority. That would be my guess.
Well,
but
one would think so, but
I'm not certain of that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, okay. Thank you, Simon. Anyone else? No? Okay. Simon, are there any recommendations?
Yeah.
Yes,
Sorry.
there are.
Let me go back to the beginning. Yeah, sorry. Recommendations are that members note the content of the report, that members agree that a report shall continue to be presented on an annual basis to the area committee, which sets out full records of all Section 106 activity for the preceding financial year and which reflects changes in legislation and practice. That other than that, where a contribution has been negotiated for a specific purpose or project, ward members of the area where the Section 106 obligation or unilateral undertaking funding is generated and the area committee be consulted prior to the funding being allocated away from that area. Members must note that the discretionary funds are rapidly diminishing and will not be replaced under current legislation and practice for reasons that are set out in this report. Is that agreed? Okay. Silence confirmed.
Agreed.
I think that's agreed, Simon. And thank you very much, Simon. Sorry you had to wait for so long.
Thanks very much. Good evening, everybody. Cheerio.
I hope you don't have to wait so long at Royston tomorrow or wherever you're going.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, Simon. Cheers. Bye-bye. Right, item 7, grants and community update. I don't think we've got any grants, but Ashley.
Thank you, Chair. If members could just have a look at 7.3, this is your current budget for the remainder of the year. So you've got 2 more meetings this year, December and March. Bulldog Town, you have 2,528. Bulldog East, 1,262. Arbury, 880, and Weston and Sandon, £857. If you are aware of any groups that may need funding, the deadline for the December meeting, deadline for applications is the 26th of October, so not too far off. 26th is the deadline. Then the community engagement team meets to look at the applications on the 28th, and then they're taken forward to the committee after that. So if you have any little groups out there who need some funding, please ask them to get in touch with me, and I can send them the paperwork and hopefully give out some money.
Okay. Any comments?
8 point. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, who was that?
That was Ashley again.
Right. Do you want to go on, Ashley?
Yeah, thank you. 8.21 just outlines that COVID is still kind of a major part in the events and the event planning of the town. We've lost the Bullstock, we lost the Bulldog Rat Run, the fireworks has been cancelled. The Bulldog Cycle Challenge is in the balance. We're still unsure about that one. We're still waiting to hear back from the organizer of that event. In terms of the Bulldog Fair, which should have been last weekend, if some of you were in town on Friday, you would have seen that there was a single kiddie ride in the town. That was purely there just to ensure the future of the charter. The ride was there for, I believe it was there for 4 or 5 hours, and rather than being charged, people were asked to make a donation to the NHS, and I believe that the Abbots raised just over £100 for the NHS as part of that little event. Some good news with community facilities. There's 2 groups. There's the Bulldog Community Centre and Bulldog Methodist Church, which were successful in getting funding from the Community Facilities Capital Funds pot back in March. Both works are now complete, and hopefully to the benefit of the people at Bulldog and the different groups who use the town. Me was regarding, there was at the request of members, I was asked to look into feasibility of some tree planting on Whitehorse Street. You can see in my report that I've spoken with grounds maintenance, and due to lack of spacing and also issues about cabling and wiring underneath the ground, this wouldn't be possible. So that's in the report as just the bottom before 8.3. And that's all I have. If members have any questions.
Okay. Any questions of Ashley? Right, moving on to ward matters and outside organisations. Any members' reports, please? Jim, anything happening with BEF?
Just as far as BEF is concerned, everything has been, our event programme has been worse than decimated. as Ashley, we also, every single event that we had planned for this year so far has been cancelled. The cycle challenge has been postponed until the 1st of November, but that may be in doubt. The Christmas fair is going to, it may happen, but a very, very diminished Christmas fair, along with the Christmas tree lights. We'll still have that, and the Christmas lights courtesy of Rotary. And the event forum, but very, very sad. But we look forward to next year.
Yeah, well, we still got our fingers crossed for Christmas. Okay, thank you very much. Well, it's nothing more. Then I think.
Excuse me, Chair. Can I just say, Remembrance Sunday? Just a very quick update. So we haven't managed to contact anybody at all in Baldock who's doing anything for Remembrance Sunday. If anybody knows of anybody doing anything, can they contact William in our team? So at the moment there is nothing happening. However, we are planning to ensure that a wreath is laid, even if it's not done officially, just to make sure that NHDC does mark the event. But of course we won't do it during any mass gathering at all. We'll just
the British Legion in Baldock has kind of closed down, really, Hilary. That's why you're not getting any joy from the usual people there. But it would be good if we could have a wreath, and perhaps us councillors would go along on the relevant Sunday and lay it. So can you keep in touch with us, Hilary?
I will do, Chair, and we're just looking at how we do that, because obviously we don't want to encourage unauthorised, unofficial gatherings either. So we're just looking at how we would do that in towns where there's no official event.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that separately.
Yeah, Hilary, for information, I believe I've seen an email from the chair of Baldock British Legion, essentially saying that there will be no official British Legion commemoration on Remembrance Sunday.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I declare the meeting ended at whatever time it is, 21:50.
49, I make it.
Well, we'll go by you then, Hilary. Thank you very much. And Hilary, thank you, and the other guy with the IT chap. Thank you.